Good evening, everyone. I'm Johnny Cordero, and this is the Cordero Report. I am honored to have with me tonight as a guest, but I want to explain what I mean by guest. This is somebody who has a message that needs to be heard, and who I think has been treated unfairly. Um, but the implications of that unfairness, I think, go further than the person that we're getting ready to talk to, and that is that a political party, a certified political party of South Carolina, has the first time in history, as far as I know, who has moved to remove another candidate from another party who had been certified by that party and certified by the South Carolina Election Commission to appear on the ballot in November, and actually had them removed. This is scary. And the implications of it, I think it's going to come back to haunt some people, if not all of us in South Carolina. So tonight, I have as a guest Mr. Gary Votour, former candidate for governor, at least up until the primary in South Carolina. And the rest of it I've already addressed, but we're going to talk about it at length. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to give Gary the opportunity to just have a conversation with me and with you about what's been happening. And this episode is titled Progressives Are Fighting Back, a Conversation with Gary Votour. And as I said, I'm honored to have Gary as my guest tonight. Gary, hello.
I'm very thankful to be here. How are you tonight, Johnny?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. And
Good.
everything's all right with you, I take it? Okay?
Doing okay.
Doing okay?
Actually, it's kind of a relief of not being a candidate anymore in some ways.
Okay.
Um, I don't know how much backstory we need to explain, but I'll try to do this as quickly and briefly as I can so we can get to
Go
the real
right ahead.
substance of the issue.
Short time. Go right ahead.
I'm a social justice activist. I've been involved in activism in various forms for the last decade as a healthcare advocate and then working with the Poor People's Campaign and multiple groups since then. And about 2.5 years ago, I decided that I was tired of watching Democrats run centrist candidates that barely stood for anything lose over and over and over for governor in this state. So I decided I'd run for governor. So I filed as a Democratic candidate for governor, and for 2 years, I wandered around the state just like every other good candidate does, and appeared at county conventions and Democratic Party events, and did a little bit of modest fundraising, just enough to cover my costs as a candidate. And then back in February, Joe Cunningham had entered the race about a year ago. Mia McLeod had entered the race. I have a lot of respect for Mia as a candidate. I mean, her platform was very close to the progressive platform that I had adopted over the last couple of years. And I had a conversation with Trav Robertson, the party chair of the Democratic Party, about Joe Cunningham and his lack of support specifically for the $15 an hour living wage that became a part of the party platform a year before that. People worked for 6 years to make that a part of the platform, and he was not going to support that. He does not support the $15 living wage. He voted against it in Congress. His website says he does not support it. So I asked Trav Robertson, the chairman of the party, whether or not they were going to hold Joe to the party platform, because they have that right. They could say to him, listen, if you're going to run as a Democrat in our primary, you have to have you have to adopt the party platform. And that's all we ask. And what Trav said to me was, no, we're not. We could, but we're not going to. And when I pressed him for a reason, he said, because we're afraid that Joe Cunningham and Dick Harpootlian will sue us. And we can't afford the bad press. So the next day, I withdrew from the Democratic primary and decided I had some good conversations with the folks over at the Labor Party who hadn't run a candidate in many years, but they still had ballot access. And I figured, we'd wait and see what happened with the primary. I filed as the Labor Party candidate, and we decided to hold our convention after the Democratic primary. If Mia had won, I would not have run as the Labor Party candidate. I wasn't going to become the person that ran against her. If anything, I would have been trying to help her campaign, to be honest with you.
Right.
And then Joe won. So then we scheduled our convention, which we had been told by the election commission that we were fine with doing it with the timing that we had adopted. We had our convention. A unanimous vote of the delegates that were present endorsed me and Harold Gettings, my running mate, and another candidate who had filed with us, Lucas, for SC1 for a congressional seat. And we filed that stuff with the state election commission, and they certified us as candidates and put us on the ballot. At that point, a co-chair of the Labor Party complained to the election commission that we hadn't done everything quite by the book, as he saw it, because we were supposed to have had a convention back in May, and that was not really my concern. The election commission had told us that we were fine with what we did, and they had put me on the ballot. And they basically told that co-chair the same thing after consulting with the attorney general. The next thing I know, about a week or two later, the South Carolina Democratic Party filed a lawsuit in court here in South Carolina against us as candidates, against the Labor Party, and against the Election Commission, asking for an emergency injunction today. In other words, we had to go to court without an attorney. Oddly enough, the very attorney that Mr. Robertson had claimed he thought might sue him if he held Joe Cunningham accountable was Dick Harpootlian's law firm. They're the ones that represented the Democratic Party in court. Big surprise, huh? So the judge listened to us. We didn't know what we were doing in court because we're not attorneys and we didn't have representation. I didn't even know I could call witnesses to present our side of the situation. And the judge basically decided to instruct the election commission to remove us from the ballot, which they were forced to do. And so that dequalified us as candidates. Myself and Harold were removed, as well as our SC1 candidate, Lucas, and we were taken off the ballot solely because of the actions of the Democratic Party of South Carolina, which I am now renaming as the South Carolina Desperation Party. This is, I mean, I now describe myself as the voter suppressed candidate for governor because that's what this was. This was a terrible example of voter suppression using the courts to do that. Not because they suppressed me, but because they suppressed the rights of everybody in our state to vote for me if they chose to. I had a significant following of people that probably would have voted for me. I wasn't a spoiler. In the race between Cunningham and McMaster, most of us think that Governor McMaster will successfully win his reelection. That Joe Cunningham, being a centrist, barely Democrat, is not actually going to be enough to bring progressive voters to the polls. My hope was that by staying in the race as a Labor Party candidate with a very progressive platform, I'd bring some of the disenfranchised voters of our state in, and hopefully they'd vote for some of the other Democrats that were on the ticket as well when they were there voting for me. So I felt like it was a win-win for everybody. I wasn't going to take enough votes away from Joe Cunningham. If anything, I probably could have gotten some votes from Henry McMaster supporters that weren't happy with him, that didn't want to have to vote for a Democrat, but would have been okay with voting for this Labor Party guy. You know, and that's where it sits. This was, on so many levels, a wrong thing for the Democratic Party to do to somebody who months before, just barely months before, that Trav Robertson actually introduced me as the moral conscience of the Democratic Party in front of Jim Clyburn at a fish fry out in Sumter. And here we are months later. They're filing court records saying that we were lying and that we had a sham convention and that we were trying to mislead the people of South Carolina. We acted in good faith. We thought we were doing everything correctly. And honestly, if the Democratic Party hadn't taken it to court to prove their point, I'd still be on the ballot.
Wow.
And that is the bottom line.
Okay, we're gonna get in. I'd like to get into that a little more, but what I want to do
Yeah,
first, because I call this a teaching podcast. So my
Mhm.
intention in doing this is to bring to bring situational awareness, of course, but
Yeah.
also to educate as we go along. So I'm going to start with a simple question. Um,
Yep.
Please define for me uh, what is a progressive in your mind. What is a progressive?
Progressives are people who put The rights of others above all other things, period. When it comes to issues, that means supporting a living wage, supporting a woman's right to choose, um, supporting groups like Black Lives Matter and their fight for racial justice, supporting criminal reforms. Um, I could go on. My biggest thing in life has been supporting people's right to have health care. Equal access, equal equity to healthcare is an important issue for me as an advocate. I've helped people as a healthcare advocate for over a decade. And over and over and over, I keep coming back to the fact that a lot of people who are poor can't afford to have insurance and they can't afford to even get a second opinion when they're faced with a really big issue in their lives. It's a healthcare problem. They can't afford the care that they deserve. People are literally dying in this godforsaken red state of ours where Nikki Haley and then Governor McMaster refused to expand Medicaid, even though it's completely paid for by the federal government with our tax dollars. Hundreds of thousands of people in our state are being deprived of their right for something that they paid for. Working class poor people that don't have health insurance because they have to work 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. They don't get a fair wage. They don't get health insurance. Those are the values of progressivism, as far as
So,
I'm concerned.
so help me out here.
Yeah.
I've been in the Democratic Party a long time, and for people who don't know, founder of the Democratic Black Caucus of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and what I don't understand is everything that you said, I agree with. Everything you said, I support, and everything that you're talking about, I support and supported as a Democrat. So now my question becomes, why was that a problem for the Democratic Party?
Your guess is as good as mine. Um, I'm going to give you my interpretation of what
Please
they
do.
did.
Yeah.
Right? Like I said, Mia McLeod met me on almost every one of those issues. Okay. She listened when I talked about my plans for expanding Medicaid and lowering the cost of health care for everybody in our state by making Medicaid an option on the public exchange to give insurance companies competition. I mean, we had a very well thought out plan for every single issue that I took on. Mia agreed with a lot of that. Joe, I'm not so sure.
Not so
Um,
much.
I'm I'm perplexed sometimes by the Cunningham campaign strategies. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
His cries of ending the geriatric oligarchy and nobody over 82 should be able to serve in public offices. And is not just ageism; it's anti-constitutional. Last I checked, the Constitution didn't have an upper age limit on how old you had to be held to
No,
be
no, it
to hold
doesn't.
public
You're absolutely
office.
right. Obviously.
I mean, and I could go on and on and on about the faults of his campaign. Right now he's just using the abortion rights issue as a fundraising tactic. He keeps saying that the only thing that's going to save women's right to abortion is his magic veto pen. I've added the word magic. Um, but he doesn't seem to either grasp or want people to understand that he can't veto something that's already a law. The 6 week heartbeat ban is a law. It's appealed in court right now. He hasn't said that he'll call for it to be repealed. I'm not sure that. I spent a large part of my life in New England, and back in New England, we'd have called Joe Cunningham a Republican. I can't say that any clearer. All right, just because somebody says they're a
I'm only
Democrat,
laughing because I agree with you completely.
because
I agree with
you
you
can say
completely.
he's a Democrat and supports democratic values, but he voted against $15 an hour when he was in Congress. And that's something President Biden supports. He's come out and said that President Biden shouldn't run for reelection because he's too old. And by default, that would include Jim Clyburn.
No.
Really. And Jim Clyburn, Jim's response to that statement on Joe's part was wonderful. He waited a few days, and when somebody asked him in the media what he thought about Joe calling for everybody over 82 to step down, he just looked at the camera and he went, "Joe needs to grow up." So now we've got a Democratic Party that's got their main candidate who is lukewarm at best when it comes to progressive values. So I guess what they're saying is that the party's values are no longer what we thought it was. they don't support $15 an hour.
Well,
They're
no.
not okay with things like an assault rifle ban to save people's lives. They're not really okay with a solid plan to expand Medicaid. They're okay with somebody who just makes empty campaign promises in order to get funding to further his own political career.
Well, it looks as though all of the things that they espoused and even even included in the platform were just there for up until the election, and
Or until
they've
push
abandoned
came to
most of
shove.
everything after that. Yeah, yeah.
Or
Um,
until push came to shove, and they actually had to hold their candidates accountable for it. Now, I'm going
which
to make very
they
clear
couldn't
that
do. Mhm.
this was, they talk about fairness. One of the excuses that Trav has used for taking us off the ballot through the court system was to make it fair, that everybody has to be fair in politics. But it wasn't fair to me or I during the primary season for Joe Cunningham to be able to raise money from the tourism and the restaurant industry by saying, and I'm not going to go to $15 an hour, while we were saying what the party platform said, that we will support $15 an hour as a living wage with cost of living raises, a minimum of $15 an hour.
Uh,
That wasn't fair at all. That was definitely putting a thumb on the scale. And then there was other things that happened even after I left the party that we can talk about that don't seem fair. I
Go
mean,
ahead.
the South Carolina
It's your
Black
time.
Caucus, for example, the South Carolina Black Caucus was trying to arrange a debate between the two gubernatorial candidates, me and McLeod and Joe Cunningham. And then Trav Robertson stepped into it and told SCETV that the Democratic Party didn't endorse that debate, and he killed it.
And
From
just for
what I think, but
just to say, just for those who don't know, we keep referring to Trav Robertson. Trav Robertson is the chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party presently. Okay.
he is an elected, paid leader, and he's very well compensated.
Hmm. Okay.
So he told SCETV that the Democratic Party wouldn't endorse or support that debate, and he killed it, even though it was his own South Carolina Democratic Party Black Caucus that was trying to set that up. And then they made up an excuse about somehow two or three people within the Democratic Party Black Caucus were on Mia's payroll. Well, the Democratic Party Black Caucus has hundreds of members. And shame on them because a couple of them were working for Mia's campaign. They weren't going to be in charge of the debate. They weren't going to be setting the questions. They knew that. They used that as an excuse. And then where did that debate end up? It ended up with the Post and Courier's bourbon in the back room crowd, where Joe could control the narrative because Joe controls the print media, because Joe has the money that he raised to buy all sorts of media coverage from the conglomerates that cover the television stations and the press. Huh. And
I,
so that debate happened days before the primary, and nobody even asked whether or not Joe Cunningham supports $15 an hour. It wasn't even a question.
oh,
Yeah,
okay. Let me just ask this question. Um,
sure.
because I want what I want to do is I want to part of this is education, as I said. So just to be clear here, the South Carolina Elections Commission certified you, correct?
Yeah,
Okay,
correct.
and you're taking okay. Um, the South Carolina Election Commission requested an opinion from the Attorney General or the Secretary of State. Was it right?
Attorney General.
The Attorney General,
Yep,
and the Attorney General did not give an opinion as to
that
whether
is
or
correct.
not that was legal. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And so then the South Carolina Democratic Party brought a lawsuit in their name. Do you know if that lawsuit was authorized by the executive committee of the South Carolina Democratic Party by any chance? Just whether you know.
To the best of my knowledge, no, it wasn't.
Okay.
I've spoken with several members of the executive committee, de facto members, as well as one other member, that said they were not aware of the lawsuit until they read about it on social media.
Okay. And it was brought by the law firm of a former chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party.
Yes, Dick Harpootlian, who is also a sitting state senator in the General Assembly.
Okay. And one other thing that people may not know, and that is that I brought a lawsuit against the South Carolina Democratic Party. And in my lawsuit, which by the way is still pending, is now
Hmm.
in the South Carolina Court of Appeals. Okay. Uh, my argument was the same argument that they made against you, but only it was against them because they held conventions outside of the time scheduled by the South Carolina Election Commission. Here's something
I
else
know.
that people will not know, but they should look into, and that is the judge who ruled against me is the same judge who had an opposite finding in the case of the South Carolina Democratic Party. I think that's important for people to understand that. So
Correct.
what I'm saying is that what it is, in my view, is how the system operates. It's awful, but lawful. And I mean, when I say that, I mean this. They sued, and a judge decided whether the judge is right or wrong is not important. The judge had the authority to do what the judge did. Now, whether the judge held incorrectly or not is yet to be determined. Maybe because I understand the South Carolina Labor Party or you or the other candidates did not um, file an appeal. Is that correct?
Because yeah, because they waited until the very last minute to file this lawsuit. The Election Commission has strong deadlines. They have to start printing ballots like this week in order to get them out to meet the federal laws about overseas ballots and
Yes.
military ballots.
Right.
So that's why they asked for an emergency injunction. There wasn't sufficient time for us to file an appeal with the state Supreme Court, get it on their docket, have the case heard, and have the lower court decision overturned in order to put us back on the ballot. There was not going to be any time to do that. Plus, it was difficult, even at best, to try to find legal representation. We
Okay.
don't have a word that, you
Let's
know,
talk. Let's talk about.
what amazes me also is that the Democratic Party is spending the money that people give them filing lawsuits against a Labor Party candidate to clear the ballot instead of spending that money on their get out the vote efforts. I understand that there are county chairs all across the state who are being told that the party doesn't have the money to support their get out the vote efforts, to do new voter registration drives. And here they are spending money on law firms to take third party candidates off the ballot who likely were not going to influence the outcome of the election, who are there to try to change the narrative and bring attention to issues and hopefully bring a few more votes to the ballot.
I have it. I just as an aside here, I have it on good information that the South Carolina Democratic Party has to date on in fighting my lawsuit. They have spent over $90,000. And I suspect that I got that information some time ago. So I suspect now it's probably because they just filed another motion. So I
Yeah,
suspect that it's probably somewhere up north of $100,000. Again, as you said, all donations that people have given them.
yeah.
South
And
Carolina Democrat.
I don't think people understand where their money goes. There's no I did some research. I haven't I've been able to find like an annual report from the South Carolina Democratic Party that
You
explains
won't
to
find one.
people. I know that. That explains to people how they spend the money they give them. All right. And I don't know of any nonprofit organization that doesn't have an annual report, even stockholder reports for large corporations. When you're talking about millions and millions of dollars in donations, I think people have a right to know how they're spending the money. I think people assume that it's going to be used to support Democratic Party candidates. When I can tell you from my own experience running with the Democratic Party for 2 years, there was virtually no support as a candidate. We were told before the primary, we can't really help you. There
Mm.
was no access to email lists or anything like that. I mean, they handed me a list of press contacts that was a year out of date and a list of the names of the county chairs and said, you're on your own. That was the extent of the support that the party gave me for 2 years as a candidate.
Did they? Okay. I don't know that. I don't know that it's fair to say that they are not helpful, although it appears to me that they are not. However, My question, I think, is probably more importantly is over the last 20 years, roughly, the South Carolina Democratic Party has raised in excess of $60 million. Now, I don't know where that money goes, but $60 million, and they have consistently lost. So, would it be fair to say that South Carolina Democratic Party is raising money to lose? Is the money is the money in losing? Because it seems to
Well,
me that that's. What do you think about that?
well, they're obviously raising money and they're obviously losing. Whether it's by intent or not, I don't really know. That would mean, I'd have to be a psychic and actually read people like Trav
Okay.
Robinson's mind. But I think that there's more money to be made in winning. But I mean, do parties need to make money? I didn't think that was their function. I thought their function was to channel donations to candidates. And what I've learned is that that's not the case. There's barely any support mechanism for candidates, and they wonder why nobody wants to run. And this isn't unique to South Carolina. I've been doing some research since this happened with us. In North Carolina, the Democratic Party there fought in court to take the Green Party candidates off the ballot. And they eventually lost on an appeal in federal court because they got a good law firm and fought it. And it was done months before their deadlines came into play. It's happened in New York and I think in Wisconsin that Democratic Party operatives have been trying to get third party candidates off the ballot. And to me, as somebody who was a big part of the resistance for 4 years against Donald Trump, that wouldn't the efforts of the Democratic Party be better spent trying to beat Republicans than acting like a bully to third party candidates? While at the same time, they're trying to raise money. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, that some of the candidates that we have running right now, their election strategy seems to be um, extortive. It seems like they're saying it'd be a shame if something happened to those voting rights you have over there.
Hmm.
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. Wow. Wow. How
And
about the
that to me is not democracy.
yeah? What about the future? I'm not talking about just the
Yeah,
midterm elections. I'm talking about what do you think about the future for democracy and for the Democratic Party with regard to
I think
inclusiveness?
that
With regard to what do you think?
the South Carolina Democratic Party needs fresh, new leadership. The people that they have there, their executive director, their chairperson, they've got a long history of being in those roles in other parties in other states, and it didn't go well. Um, I'm not going to get into the weeds on that,
Right.
but they ended up here. I think they need to be removed. And I've actually called for Trav to resign over this and let his second chair take over and try to salvage what's left of this election season.
You did that
Um,
formally?
yeah, it's in the statement, the press statement I made.
Oh,
I
okay. Let's.
also told him that he needed to stop acting like the acting childish and vengeful. And I don't know whether he was just angry because I left the party and kind of blamed him for it, but it was the reason why I left the party. So yeah, I told him I was going to say it, and I did. I don't know if he was thinking that he could do Joe Cunningham a favor by quelling the voice of somebody who was actively complaining or pointing out some of the problems with his platform. Well, I don't know how successful that was. Now I'm telling people they should probably just write me and McLeod in for governor if they want to make a vote that actually makes sense. Um, I don't think that Joe Cunningham is going to win this election. Personally,
Any
he
predictions?
he
How?
released a poll this week that says 7% behind McMaster, but there was a significant undercount of black voters in that poll. And honestly, I would predict 15% minimum on his loss. But I could be wrong. Maybe it'll be 14. But either way, he's not going to win. McMaster has just started with his campaign against him. The frat boy Joe ads are running on television already. McMaster has millions of dollars to spend against Joe Cunningham, and Joe is wandering around on a pony, comparing himself to Ronald Reagan on social media. I mean, this is the most insane attempt to run for governor I've ever seen, and it makes me question whether or not he's really running for governor or just trying to build a political brand so that he can run for something else 2 years from now, like fiber and
Prob-
seed.
Probably.
You know, that's not really my problem. But as far as the party goes, they need leadership that's diverse. It needs to represent the people of South Carolina. Period.
Okay, that being said, we're getting close to end time.
Yeah. And like I
If
said,
you,
Trav Robinson, based on what he's done and what he has said and the behaviors he has exhibited, he should resign and let somebody else take over the party for the rest of the election season. I can't say that loud enough.
I hear. Okay.
That would be the
Um,
right thing for him to do if he cared about his party.
Aside from that, if one were looking to, and you had the magic wand or the crystal ball to look into, um, and you were looking for a way to win, I'm talking about Democrats or blue persons or better, or progressives, any way you want to look at it, anything other than Republicans,
Yeah.
um, what would you do? You'd have to form some sort of coalition. And what would that coalition be if you agree that that's true?
I think that the Democratic Party starts need to paying attention to candidates that can actually reach the disenfranchised and disillusioned voters of our state. 200,000 people did not bother to vote in the last election cycle. Why? The majority of them are black. The majority of them would probably vote Democrat if they voted, but they don't feel like the Democrats care about them enough to go vote. They don't feel like Republicans care about them. My entire point in running was to run a campaign that was based on showing people that we could actually represent values that would benefit them. Things like a minimum wage, Medicaid expansion, all of those things that matter to people that have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet and survive in our state on basically slave labor. You know, the pay is just abysmal. Nobody should have to do this. Having progressive candidates that support the values that the voters actually need to hear about is how you win elections. We don't have that, at least not in our gubernatorial candidate. And that's the lead ticket item that draws people to the polls. Some of the other Democrats on the ballot, they're progressive. They support most of the issues that I do. But I'm not here to endorse them or call them out by name. Most of them do. And it's a shame that they're going to suffer in November because, like it or not, people in South Carolina that do go vote for Democrats tend to vote straight ticket. And if they're not there to vote for the governor candidate because they feel like, whatever, he don't care about me. He only cares about certain people of certain colors or certain places where they live or certain incomes. Everybody on the ballot from the Democratic Party suffers for that. And then the
Agreed.
entire state suffers under 2 or 4 more years of Republican leadership.
That's right. Gary, it has been a pleasure. And one thing I can say about you, you certainly don't bite your tongue, which is a good thing. And I think we need more of that. We need candidates who speak up, candidates who do their homework, and apparently you have done so. Um, I'm I'm sorry to see the way you were treated. They're flat out bullies, is what they were.
I know.
It's going to come back to haunt them. Okay, but
All right, fine. Hey,
I want you to know that if it means anything at all to you, I think you're a hero, and I use that term advisedly. Um, Hopefully, there will come a time, and the thing that may cause it may be a sound beating of Joe Cunningham in the gubernatorial election, and maybe people will begin to see. But I think what's happening, what I see on the horizon, is a lot of progressives are following suit. A lot of progressives are now abandoning the Democratic Party and are now becoming independents. And I just read a statistic yesterday that said that independents, and a good portion of which are progressives, and disillusioned Democrats now represent something like 41%
Yeah.
potential
And
vote.
that's a statistic that they ignore at their own peril.
That's right.
It
That's
truly
right.
is.
It
Because
has.
I can tell you that in my experience, people who traditionally vote for Republicans are still going to vote for Republicans, no matter how much Joe
That's right.
Cunningham tries to appeal to them. He's not going to pry away those R's and turn them into D's.
Not a
That's
chance.
not going to work. It didn't
Chance.
work with Smith. It didn't work with Shaheen. It hasn't worked in almost 30 years in this state. And what do they say? Insanity is repeating the same things
Same thing
over and
over
over and
and over,
over and
expecting a
expecting a
different
different
result.
result.
That's right. That's right. Gary, it's my pleasure talking to you. Uh,
Okay,
we'll talk again, I'm sure, because we're going to
I'm
hear
sure.
about this. But again, I hope your predictions are right. I suspect that they will be. And hmm,
Honestly, I'd like to hope I'm wrong.
isn't
I'd
that
like
true?
to hope that
Isn't
the
that true? Is
Democrats
that
should
always
win.
true? Isn't that
But
true?
if I'm actually being honest, which is my fault, that's why I'm done with politics. I realized when I said this when I left, I can't do politics. I'm too honest to be a politician.
I
It
agree with
requires you to lie sometimes. It requires you to overlook the lies of other people. And I'm an activist. I can't do that.
you. I
So
agree. And thank God for you. Gary,
thank
thank you
you.
so much for this time. Okay. And I will be talking. All right. Have a good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That was Gary Votour, and you've heard it from him. And it's not my editorializing, it is the words of the person who was treated extremely unfairly. Not only him, but it's the candidates who were also on the ballot, as well as the South Carolina Labor Party, and perhaps as importantly, every South Carolinian has been done a disservice by what was done to Gary and the South Carolina Labor Party. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Thank you.